Thank you all so much for coming. This is an event hosted through the Brain Student Group, affiliated with the Brain Center here at UH. Although we are affiliated with the Brain Center, we try to invite everyone because we feel like a lot of our events are applicable to students. To kind of start off, I want to introduce myself first and foremost. My name is Fahim Ershad. I am a third year PhD student in Dr. Kunjiang Yu's group in mechanical engineering. I'm actually a biomedical engineer, but he's an adjunct professor in the BME department. Um, Apart from myself, the student group is really centered around fostering community and collaboration amongst the students, faculty, and staff of the UH Brain Center. Um, and we're hosting these types of events to try and connect people, particularly within and outside of the Brain Center, to foster some of this community, to kind of guide each other in each of our own individual journeys. Um, so the idea for this panel really came about through a discussion with some of the senior PhD students among some of the labs across UH. And we all felt like it would be really nice if we had that one senior person in our lab that we could always go to and ask for pretty much anything, whether it was like, hey, how do I buy something for my research, or what papers do you suggest to read to get me started learning about the field? And we figured having a panel to at least kind of start that discussion, or at least have more people involved to be more willing to reach out and ask for guidance, is a great way and strategy for newer PhD students, even people that are senior like us, to open up and ask each other and collaborate on things. And so that's why we're here. And with that said, I'm going to have Rafael introduce himself. He'll also introduce the format of the panel, and then he'll introduce the panelists. So without further ado, Rafael, the floor is yours.
Uh, Thank you very much, Fahim. Let's first introduce myself. So I'm Rafiul. I'm a fourth year PhD student in electrical engineering department, and I work in Dr. Rose Vagis lab, in the computational medicine lab. So I'll be first, giving the overview of the format of this panel. So the whole discussion will be about 1 hour, and then we have sent out forms to everyone to give like their questions. So we have some questions from the audiences beforehand, so we'll be trying to answer them first, and then if you have any question at the moment, you can please feel free to put them in the chat. We will get back to those after we answer the previous questions. So right now, so the we can go over a little bit 1 hour if everyone is okay. So there is that flexibility as well. So right now I'm going to introduce our graduate students, so who was very generous to be answer all the questions. So first I would like to introduce Sydney. She is a third year PhD student in cellular and molecular biology. Her work focuses on traumatic brain injury. So, and with her spare time, she stays involved on campus in graduate student leadership and committees. She hosts an informative medical history comedy podcast called Malpractice. And then we have Alex Craig. So he is a third year PhD student. He works in Dr. Contras Vidal's lab in electrical and computer engineering. His work revolves around two main topics: deep learning applications on EEG analysis and system design for a custom brain-computer interface. After his graduation, he hopes to pursue a career in consulting, R&D, or a startup. Then we have Akshay Ravindran. He is a fifth year PhD student. He also has become recently PhD candidate. So his research focuses on developing different engineering tools for analyzing non-invasive electrophysiological data. His expertise lies in developing deep learning models to study EEG, with an emphasis on explainability of these models. He plans to graduate by December. He significantly values mentoring and advocacy for students and volunteers for such initiatives in his spare time.
All right, thank you, Rafael. Just want to take a moment to welcome the panelists again. And with that said, I will also say that Rafael and I may also tack on some of our own answers to questions at the end of all of your panelists' responses. And again, if the audience members currently have any questions or if people join later, we can have them to leave questions in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. So with that said, I'll kind of go in the order that we started the introduction. So starting with Sydney, could you give us some context for a little more background on how you began your PhD journey? Is there anything that you did right before you started your PhD that you think could have helped you in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started my PhD in a little bit of a weird way. I did my bachelor's degree is in biochemistry, and I got out and I thought, okay, I'll go ahead and get a job in probably oil and gas or something like that. And then there was a crash in the industry in 2014. So I said, probably not going to do that. Shell laid off like 5,000 people in Houston alone. So I was like, okay, probably not going to go work in oil and gas. And I had always been really passionate about healthcare and things like that. So I got a master's in public health, and my PI, my now PI, was on my master's thesis committee because she was one of the people doing traumatic brain injury work. And I started my master's thesis on traumatic brain injury work. And she kind of poached me out of that program and said, I think you have a future in my lab if you want to join it. The thing I did that I would highly recommend, so right before I started my PhD, the summer between my master's and my PhD, I got married. Not saying I would recommend that. I mean, it's great, get married if you want to get married, but that's not the advice. The advice was that I took the summer off. I had originally tried to start early. I was like, I'll get in the lab, I'll go ahead and like get going. And what you need to remember is that a PhD is a huge commitment, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. There's no way to, really push hard for like one extra month and finish early. Like it's a marathon. So take time when you need time, take personal time, take mental health time, like when you need those things. I know the culture is different for every department, but for my department, it has recently become a big thing. Like if you need mental health time, take it when you need it. Because burnout in PhD programs is very, very real. And I know you, at the very beginning, you're super excited to get started, but take time when you need it would be my advice.
Awesome. Thank you. I totally agree with taking a break right before starting your PhD because the time commitment thing is huge. I think I'll let Alex go next.
Yeah, as for the burnout thing, I think that's a really real thing. I think the statistic is for like engineering graduates that it's 60%, completion rate. So it is a long commitment and it's hard, but I do think it's going to end up being worth it. I did my undergrad degrees in aerospace engineering and economics at University of Texas, and then I joined a consulting team that worked with marine consulting work, and did that for 5 years. I just didn't really like where it was going, to be completely honest. I don't really like the industry. So I knew if I was going to switch industries, I had to go back to grad school. So I did that. And then I started working in Pepe's lab. I think one of the things that I think maybe someone considering going into it should make sure that they keep in mind is your research experience during grad school is going to be heavily reliant on what your advisor does for research, right? So I didn't really think too much about that. I know I wanted to do non-invasive neuroengineering for a number of reasons. It's a really noisy signal. You can kind of really refine the skills that you need to deal with a noisy signal. But a lot of what Pepe's Labs does is systems engineering. Now, having said that, I really enjoy where my research has gone. I've gotten a lot of skills doing it, but if I specifically wanted to go, algorithm design, that would have been a mistake. So keep that in mind. You're going to be working at your advisor's discretion. So at least for a while, so keep that in mind, I think.
Thank you, Alex. Akshay, you want to?
Yeah, so first of all, hi all. Thank you for joining us today. So my journey sort of is like a different scenario. Initially, when I was in my undergrad, I was really not into tech or science, to be honest much. I was more into trying something with managerial roles. But it was around the time I heard this story about someone like there's someone by the name Hugh Kerr. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. So he was initially a mountain climber who actually lost his legs while doing mountain climbing in a cold place, and he had to amputate his legs, right? And the doctors basically said, I mean, you can't really do mountain climbing anymore. I mean, this guy was actually a prodigy in mountain climbing, and this scenario actually was devastating, right? Now, instead of basically living a life of remorse, what he did is after a couple of months, he built himself a prosthetic and he actually started climbing much higher and much farther away, right? And then he went on to get a master's degree, a PhD degree. Now he's heading a lab in MIT, right? I mean, this guy's story on how engineering can actually really change someone's life, how the body is like very super awesome, right? I mean, I was really fascinated by this. And that really kicked me to pursue this thing. At that time, I didn't really have this background. So I took, after graduating undergrad, I worked in a research lab for 1 year in India in IIT. So I learned about peripheral signals, our EKG, PPG, all those things, right? It was very fascinating, but I realized that I'm missing out on one of the biggest and most complex things in the body, right? The human brain. So I really wanted to study that. In India, the research on brain is actually next to almost nothing. Like there's very minimal research happening there because it's research intensive, right? So for me, it was a natural choice at that point to try to find places in US, with the brain initiative and everything happening. I really wanted to get here, and I was really fortunate that Dr. Contras Vidal was willing to take me in at that time. I wasn't sure if I'll get in. I was very lucky in some sense, and I got here. And if I can say what is one thing I would if I knew before I started, it is the type of mentor really matters, right? Why I'm emphasizing this is, in some sense I was lucky because my professor he's really great. I mean, he's very connected and everything, but he does not micromanage, right? There are different styles of mentoring. So my PI does not micromanage. We have to do independent work. We collaborate with the lab and we do all these things. uh, but if I was someone who really wanted some level of micromanage, because it's not wrong, micromanaging is not wrong, some people really want that, right? So if I was someone who wanted micromanaging and ended up being in this lab, I would have suffered significantly, right? So it's always best you should talk to people who work in the lab, in the lab that you're going to join early on. Talk to the alumni, talk to the students, get to know how the PI works, try to understand how the style is, and then I would say join that. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, I also think that really the PI dictates so much of what it is that you end up doing, right? So with that in mind, we also had a question that one of the audience members submitted to the forum, and that was, what is your thought process, or what was your thought process behind choosing your PI currently? And you might have kind of answered that a little bit, but if you could add a little bit more, that'd be great. I think I'll start with Sydney again.
Yeah, no problem. A big part of mine was about seeing where her previous students had gone. I think it's really important to check out what types of jobs they ended up in, what types of universities or what types of positions they ended up in. For instance, if you want to stay in academia forever and your boss has a high placement rate in academia, then I think that that's a good fit for you. There is a little bit of a culture that leaving academia is like living an alternative lifestyle. And so that's a conversation to have early on in your PhD so that your PI is not surprised when you're like, oh, I'm going to leave for industry, and make sure that they have connections in industry that they can place you with. Because some are very heavily focused on academia and then they have no industry connections. And if you're looking for an industry job, I'm not saying you should rely exclusively on your PI's connections to get a job, but they are going to be your primary recommender. And also, like Alex said, the work matters a lot. If you don't absolutely love a project that your PI is already working on, it's possible in my department to kind of pitch a proposal to the PI, but if it doesn't align with what they're already doing, then it doesn't make sense to work with them. We have an undergrad now who really wants to join our lab, for instance, and he thinks he does, and he wants to do forensic biology. And I'm like, this is not the lab for you. We work on traumatic brain injury. So I think it's really important, and that's probably a little bit of a disconnect between undergrad and graduate, is that the focus of your work matters a lot more because it's really narrow and really specific. Like my PI would have no idea how to consult on forensic biology. And so it's important to kind of look at the focus, tailor the focus to what your career and your research goals are.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Alex, do you want to add?
Yeah, so I mean, when I came back to school, I just knew I wanted to get out of oil and gas. So I knew if I picked anything close to energy, I might be more inclined to leave the master's once I finished the master's. So, choosing something like non-invasive brain, computer interface systems was kind of a good choice for me, I thought. And it was, and it has been. I was doing the master's. It was kind of difficult transition back, but so I got into Pepe's lab. So I stuck with it. So, but yeah, so that's essentially how I chose that lab.
Gotcha. Cool. Akshay, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, at that time, I did not really look at the broader things. I was just looking at their research. I was really ill-informed at that time, to be honest. At my time, I was just, okay, this guy is awesome. When I read about it, I was like, oh, wow, this guy is awesome. I really like this work. And when I heard he's doing brain-machine interface at that time, being from India, to me, that's like, wow, this is science fiction. I want to do that. I want to jump on board, right? I mean, man, that was the thing, right? For me at that time, this was the biggest factor, right? But retrospectively, would that be the biggest factor? I mean, definitely, as Sydney and Alexa read, the topic is very important because if you don't really like it, there's no point in doing that. But I think this is where I would like to stress it a bit more. It's very important. The other aspects of it, as Sydney put it, right? It's a long marathon. So if you don't really match with your advisor, the style and everything, it's going to be a tough journey. Maybe I could, if I have some time, I can maybe two types of PIs, right? Someone who's very experienced, someone who's actually really new, right? So that's a choice that you have to take. That is, if you are a relatively new PI, they're going to actually work with us because they need a tenure. They're going to work as hard as us. They're going to work closely with us. They'll spend more time with us and you'll get good papers out, right? So that's a good thing. But the problem is, at the same time, if it's a very experienced PI, right? If that's the case, you'll have more collaborations, you'll have more connections, you'll have more opportunities to write other things. For example, we got to write book chapters and we got to make conferences, attend organize conferences. So there are other additional things if you have a senior PI. So it's like a balance on what is needed for you or what feels like the best match for you. So as I said, it's 5 years of your life, right? That's a long time. So think of your priorities, which make sense, and choose either of those, I think.
Also, if I can jump in for one more second, there's two more things that are kind of granular that I didn't really talk about, and those two are publications and funding. If you really decide that you want to stay in academia, for instance, and you decide I need to get a Nature or Science Cell paper before I get out, whatever, those are the ones that are, top of my field, whatever. And you have a PI who's never published in those, it's probably not going to happen. So think about that. And also think about funding, because at the University of Houston, for instance, in our department, we have the option to either teach or be on RA. If you teach, it obviously takes a lot of time, but then you have teaching experience. If you go somewhere like Rice, you don't have the option to teach. And so if you want to stay in academia, that's something to consider too. But those two things, if you're getting granular and you have options, publications and funding are both very important.
Yeah, I was actually just about to add that to your point, Sydney, because it was on my mind too as you were talking about your PI. And to add to Akshay's point, actually, I got to witness a real life transition from a younger PI to a more senior PI, because when I joined my PI's group, he was actually an assistant professor, and he was on top of us all the time. And it was a matter of finishing that project within 2 months. It was like rapid, go, go, go. And after he got tenure in 2019, it was like a step back, and he's like, okay, let's focus on these bigger projects, get published in some of these bigger journals. The more time commitment and collaborative projects became more of a focus. And it really is almost a world of difference in how their attitude could change. I mean, of course, it'll vary from PI to PI, but having tenure has a substantial impact on how the PI will behave. All right, with that one out of the way, let's go to the next question. So kind of running back to you again, Sydney. If you had to choose one, what is the one thing you wish you knew when you started your PhD?
I thought, do we not answer that one? Because I'm going to say.
I guess we kind of did. But if you haven't, I mean, go ahead, Alex, if you have something you want to add.
Yeah, it was mainly the advisor selection.
Yeah.
That was my main thing. Really.
I got you. If any of you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is not a knock on my PI at all. Well, maybe it is a little bit, but it's not her fault necessarily. My PI is the chair of the department, and it means that she spends a lot of time putting out chair of the department fires. That is not an issue for me because I don't need, like, I'm a pretty like self-starter person. I don't need a lot of management. I think other people have suffered when PIs are overcommitted to things because they need more management. Like I kind of came in and got started on a track and I was like, cool, I can figure this all out by myself. Not everyone is like that. And if you're like that, I would not recommend joining the lab of someone who has lots of exterior commitments outside of the lab.
Yeah.
I also think so too. And I think one way to find that out, probably at least before you join the lab, is to try and get in contact with some of the grad students to see what their PI is doing, and especially when the PI is not around. All right, then I'll move on to the next question. And that is, what were some of the challenges you faced when writing your first manuscript? So this time, I guess I'll start with Akshay.
Yeah, so when I was starting, I mean, this is completely new, right? I mean, at that time, I was trying to adapt to everything, and I didn't have a master's, so I did the bachelor's to PhD. So I didn't have too much of writing paper experience. I had just one paper before that. So when I came here, my initial impression was I should put all the scientific jargon to seem very scientific-y thing, right? If that's even a word, right? Like I just thought that I should make it as complicated as possible to seem intellectual, right? Because this is my first time. I wanted to impress everyone, and I thought, right? And then there was the other thing that in the back of my mind, to me, when I read the paper, everything made sense. Like, this is a perfect paper. I understand everything. But when someone else reads the paper, they're like, what the hell did you write in here, right? There's basically no, one paragraph is going nowhere. The other one is starting from somewhere else. So, I mean, so it's all in my mind because I've been working with my data for all these years, right? I know my data. I know the story. I know what is happening. But if I don't really write it well in my paper, someone else is going to be completely lost. They'll have no idea what's happening here, right? So always having a third person perspective when writing the paper is very important. Okay, what am I trying to say? The idea is not to seem or sound intellectual. It's more like you're trying to convey your finding to someone else, right? You want whatever you find to be shared with the community so that they can use it and use it in their research. That's the purpose of writing a paper. Because if they don't understand, they won't cite you, they won't replicate you, right? So the idea is not to make it complicated, it's to make it in such a way, like while including the technicalities in a readable fashion. So I'm still figuring it out, but but at the initially I was just not considering all this. I just wanted to make it seem very fancy. I think I had to just having the third person perspective was very important. I think that was one of the challenges I felt.
Cool. Thank you. Alex, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I hadn't written in an academic sense in a long time. Well, in a long time when I came back to school. So I mean, there are a couple of learning things I had to put into it. I think in some ways I was a bit on the opposite side of the spectrum as Akshay. I was maybe a bit too conversational at the beginning. So yeah, so I think I wrote down a couple of things. I mean, you should be concise. There's no reason to put filler words in there at all. I mean, you want to get your ideas on the paper as concise as possible. So every sentence should have a purpose. What you're doing with it is you're writing a story, right? So the sentences should link together. It shouldn't be filler stuff to do it, but it needs to be a flow for the reader, or else they're gonna be frustrated when they're reading your stuff, and that frustration will take away from your science. So that is important. I think the other two things, but I think writing an outline is like an extremely helpful tool. If you write a really detailed outline, you're just expanding on the ideas you already have on paper. So writing a story based on an outline is a lot easier than just writing whatever comes to mind. And I guess the most important thing for me when I came back is, well, Dr. Contreras asked me to write a review paper, and well, if you don't know what a review paper is, you're reading all the material out there in a certain subject and compiling all that information to do a paper. Well, that was frustrating because I didn't really know much about the subject anyway. And, a lot of these papers, well, it was on deep learning. So a lot of these papers weren't that well written, but, reading through, 200 papers really made me understand like how to get my message across through my own writing. So I think the most important thing is to read academic papers and read good academic papers and keep reading. And then eventually it'll sink in.
Gotcha. Great. Sydney, you want to add on?
Yeah, I think finding a good schedule that works for you for writing. My boss, for instance, likes to take what she calls, I mean, this is a well-established thing. It's a Pomodoro unit. It's 25 minutes and then you spend 5 minutes doing something else. I cannot work that way because I can't do anything for 5 minutes. I like to sit down for like 4 to 8 hour like marathon writing sessions where I have like a giant iced coffee and I don't leave the table. That's my preferred way of working. But when I'm working with someone who works in 25-minute sections, it can be a little challenging because it's a really different style. And so I think that kind of figuring out when you're asked to do something like a review paper, figuring out exactly what the expectation is and what you want to get out of it is one important thing. I would say if you're shooting for a specific journal, look at the requirements, number one, for that journal before you publish in it. You should also look at what the expectation is as far as writing. If the writing is really flowery, then go for it, go crazy with the filler words, right? But if it's very like bare bones and you have a very strict word limit, the best thing you can do is write down everything you want to say and then trim it back, trim the fat away as soon as you have everything written down. And then I guess I would also say, after your qualifier, for me, after my qualifier was a great time to write a review paper, because one of my qualifier questions, I don't know how you guys do it in engineering. One of my qualifier, like we have a written question section, and I literally wrote what was basically a literature review. And one of the professors on my committee was like, hey, if you wanted to turn this into a literature review, you will never be more well acquainted with the literature than you are right now. So I would highly recommend doing it after your qualifiers when you've just spent a ton of time with the literature.
Great answer. I think, Rafael, you have something to add too?
Yes, I would like to share my experience with my first manuscript. So basically kind of what Akshay said, I had the similar experience. The first time I wrote, I didn't try to make it complicated, but at least what I did, it was already like mathematically, or like it was a signal processing problem. So it was a little bit complicated. And then I was just trying to, write whatever I have done, but I was not trying to make it easy for the reader to read and follow the story. And the 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 one thing I learned throughout writing multiple paper is that if we cannot tell a story, then people will not really understand what is the purpose of your work, or does it really matter, or what the results you're showing, does they actually make any sense. So to plot it in a story way, as Alex also pointed out, is very important. And then, for the first journal was very, it was not, it was like basically a lab report written in like half an hour or something like that. But then I attended some of the seminars on writing, and then I saw there are actually structures that you can follow to build a story. And I think people in creative writing, they actually care about those a lot. So then I tried to look at some of the structure, and then try to read some papers, like good papers, and see whether can I find some structure there. Then I really it really helped me a lot. Now when I try to write something, any sentence, as Alex mentioned, that any sentence I write, it is not just for filling up the spaces. It has its own purpose, and it has it is supporting the story in some way. So that is why I wanted to say. And then other thing is, I other thing helped me a lot is like getting feedback from lab mates, like
Yeah.
from multiple person. Every person has different views, but when you have like 3 4 5 people giving you feedback, and then you might not implement everyone's feedback, but you have like an idea, like what everyone is, I mean, how everyone is looking at your in your paper. Usually you will get, for example, if your some section, some part of your paper is very difficult and confusing in general, maybe you will get like similar feedback from multiple people for that particular section. So that was another experience I had. Yes, that was basically what I wanted to help. Thank you, Fahim.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Getting the feedback thing, I think that's really important. I started writing the review paper, and I was writing with a lab mate, Chris, and our advisor asked us to write like a 1-page thing about, where we think it's going. Like Chris kind of made fun of it for like how it was written, and then and it hurt, but it certainly made me try harder to write it in a more academic sense. So yeah, I think getting feedback was extremely important in my writing.
Yeah, I have to agree with that too. I mean, for my first manuscript, I sent my paper out to like 4 other authors on my author list, and they're all seniors. They were all senior to me at the time. And of course, like you said, Rafael, you can't implement everyone's feedback, but at the end of the day, there will be some common things that they find that you'll definitely know you should have fixed. And so, yeah, of course. And at the end of the day, your advisor is probably your best help when you're really getting that submission stage. So with that in mind, I want to transition to this question, and that is, say I want to publish in a certain journal, and you can consider this, each of you on the panel, in terms of what a good journal is in your field. What is the review process like for certain journals in your field? And I'll start with, I guess, Sydney.
It's a little bit different for every journal. And so I guess for a top one in my field, the review process can take a really long time. And so if you're trying to set a specific deadline on when you graduate, I feel like, as we all are at all times, you have to think about those things really far in advance, because, for instance, it may take 8 months before a journal comes out. And if you're applying to jobs, you don't have that publication out. I mean, you can always put it out on something. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but something like eLife is something that we use a lot in biology. It's like an open source journal, basically, that you print pre-publications in. And so if you're just looking for a publication that's already been accepted, that's a great resource to get a publication out that, you know, like I said, has already been accepted to a journal, but it will give you a publication prior to that eight month waiting period. So think about the time for sure, because the review process can be really long and it can be really brutal. Some of the review comments can be, you need a whole separate set of experiments, right? Sometimes reviewers get stuck on things that you don't think are that big of a deal, but they're like, you absolutely need this set of experiments to publish this paper. And what that means is that you can either take it to a journal that won't ask you to publish those experiments, or you can do that set of experiments. And sometimes those can take a really long time too. So the biggest thing that I would say as far as the review process is that it takes a long time sometimes. Now I wrote a manuscript with, for like a top journal with one of my master's professor, or one of my master's committee members, and it came out in like a month. I was very surprised. She was like, hey, can you write like a 1-page thing that I'm going to fold into my thing? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I wrote it. And then she literally sent me the link, like a month later, sent me the link. So it just depends on the journal. For a top journal, it's usually going to be a much longer process than that. So what I would say the biggest thing is the time commitment, understand that you may have to do additional experiments, things like that.
Great, thank you. Actually, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just to add to that, right? I think one of the current challenges is, especially if you're targeting like top journals, right? The period, I mean, for him, you would know this, right? I mean, it takes for you like 2 years or something to get your science papers out, right? So, there's something called bioarchives or archives right now, which is very common. It's actually quite well. I mean, it's actually recommended that you do nowadays. Like preprints is actually something that you are encouraged to do. The advantage of that is you say, okay, I am the first to actually implement this idea. So you're actually putting it out there, and then people can do comments. Like they actually have an option to comment on it. It's not quite well practiced, but it's a good tool. Like people can put comments on it. You can modify it. So while the review is happening, you actually have, and your actual citations gets counted, right? And actually, when they convert, this is not lost. They actually convert this to the actual journal paper, and you'll actually retain your citation still. So it's actually very recommended that you put out preprints. It's now very common. I am sort of adopting it still. I'm a bit late to the game, so I'm trying to add it. But I would recommend that if you guys are working on your manuscript, if you finish it, put it out there, and then you can wait the rest.
Awesome. Thank you. Alex, do you want to add on anything?
Oh, I mean, I don't think I have too much more to add. Just, you know, I think some reviewers can sound harsh, but, you know, just take it in stride and, you know, make the edits they ask for, or respond to their edits, and just, yeah, just keep going with the process. It can be a torturous experience, but yeah, you're in grad school, you can handle it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And just from personal experience, yeah, actually I was mentioning it took me about a couple years nearly to get my paper published in Nature Communications late last year. Actually, we went through a very hellish review process, because it started in a Nature Biomedical Engineering submission that had a rebuttal, or was first rejected, and then went to Nature Electronics, had a rebuttal process, which took about 6-7 months to be done.
Yeah.
And then they were finally like, it might be good enough for NatureCom. And so I submitted my 80-page rebuttal along with my revised manuscript and new experiments to Nature Communications, who were just like, oh, okay, it's good. And then just let it get published.
I know
yeah.
the editor of NatureCom, she was probably excited to have it.
It's a fun time. It's a fun time. All right, with that out of the way, I think the next question is actually about organization and reading literature. We've actually been talking about review papers, which surprised me. I didn't realize it'd come up this early in the discussion, but how do you stay organized during your PhD when it comes to reading literature? And Sydney, you can start again.
Woof, that's a tough one. I wish I knew. No, I'd recommend, so first and foremost, when you find a really specific set of topics, like my topic is specifically traumatic brain injury. We focus on astrocytes, one of the cell types in the brain, and we focus on inflammation and sort of the inflammation cascade. And then I'm working with a specific drug compound. So what I did, like the first thing I did when I entered the program is I went and set Google alerts for all of these things: traumatic brain injury, astrocyte, neuroinflammation, tamoxifen, the drug that I'm working with. Set Google alerts for all of those things. You will get some shit and you'll have to filter it out. That's just going to happen. But also, anytime—
How do you do that?
I'll teach you later.
Okay.
Anytime a paper gets published, then you get a little ting on your computer. It's like, hey, a paper just came up. Yeah, my PI says that at the beginning of your PhD, reading papers should be like brushing your teeth. You should do 2 a day at least, right? That's not always feasible, but I will say that, yeah, I started that during my first year, and it really, really served me well during my qualifier, because I was very, very well acquainted with the literature, much more well acquainted than anybody on my committee. So keep that in mind.
Awesome, great. Alex, do you want to add on anything?
Yeah, I mean, okay, yeah. So the main thing that, when I saw this question, in my research, I've had to work on, my home Linux computer, a laptop, and a PC in the lab, and then a PC for a different research project in the lab. And it took me a while, but it was just so disorganized that you're working with files on multiple computers. I think using a cloud service for holding all your data, all of the data, and organizing it, that made my life feel a lot more organized. I think that was a big bonus. I mean, a step for my organization. So I think it was that, and then yeah, I think that was mainly it.
Cool, thank you.
So not too organized, I think.
Yeah, I get that. We're always trying to be in the process of it.
Yeah, I'm organizing on the weekend. I was like, well, next weekend.
Also, as far as staying organized with like what you've been doing and experiments and things like that, it's really important. This is maybe stupid to say, but label your samples really well if you're working with biological samples, because I saw a meme the other day that was like, doing a PhD is like doing a group project with a stupider version of yourself. And I went back in the freezer and had samples that are labeled like T4, and I'm like, what is T4? I have no idea what that means. 4 years, 2 years down the road. So label things carefully, keep detailed notes. And then also I send my PI, I'm the only one who still does this, I think, but I send my PI a monthly update of everything I've done that month. And so when I'm doing committee meetings, I can literally just go back through my emails with my PI and be like, okay, this month I did that month. So I know exactly which figures I need to make and things like that.
Oh, and I don't know if this is organization, but when you're coding a lot, save multiple revisions and save them in multiple places, because there are times if you're working on a complex software project, you mess something up, you don't know where you messed it up, and you have to go back several, days. That gets really, really frustrating. So
I agree. Actually, you want to add on?
Yeah, a few. Yeah, I could start with the. I think these are very good recommendations. One thing I've really recently fallen in love, and it might be a bit odd, is Twitter, right? It's a sort of like underappreciated, underutilized, awesome resource. I unfriended most of my friends, to be honest. Every political things, figures, I unfollowed everyone, but then I simply focused on academic people, like whoever I'm really interested in, and some journals. I actually followed them, and I put a notification on whenever something interesting happens with these researchers, right? I find the people I like the most, and I put an alert if they publish something, I'll know. And there's a good thing about Twitter is, even if you don't read it, if someone good tweets it, everyone shares it, right? So some way or the other, you'll get it. Now my problem is having this big folder in my data of unread papers. It just, I feel so overwhelmed with the number of papers coming in. And there was this time I had 4 tabs of Google Chrome, and one day I closed it and nothing happened. Right? I mean, I thought I lost my everything, all my research, but I mean, at the end of the day, nothing happened. And this is the thing, like, there is some point at which you are just hoarding papers. So finding whichever is very relevant is very important. This is very important. Right? Trying to understand which paper not to read is a very big art. If you spend too much time reading paper which doesn't make sense, it doesn't. I mean, it's a lot of wastage of time. So figure out what makes. I mean, get the papers. If you find something very interesting, save it in a local folder. I have different folders, and then I try to, whenever I read it, I move it out at the other folder. So that's how I sort of organize. In terms of coding and stuff, as Alex said, right? It's very important to have it very well commented and saved. And if you have some paper, do GitHub, right? It's very important. This again, I'm starting very recently. I started like last year, like a frequent user. So use version control, put your code in GitHub. And once you have a paper, say for example, right, if you have a paper, you have the code written it, there is a good tendency for us to re-edit that code to do something else. Never do that. Save this as a local copy. Just keep it separate. Don't change it. This is the code that worked for your paper. Whatever you want, add on top of it as another thing. That's just another, yeah.
Also, get a reference manager very early in your career.
Yeah.
I use
Yeah.
Mendeley Desktop, and it will save those citations for every, like, you just download citations, it will save them all, and you don't have to keep a hard copy. It automatically saves the abstract. So if you get lost, you can go back and remember exactly what the abstract was and why you gave a shit about that paper in the first place.
Yeah, I was about to add on that exact point. Having a reference manager is a world saver, especially when you're writing papers too, because you have to create that bibliography, that citation list, and I don't think any PhD student anymore writes this by hand. It's all automated through some sort of reference manager. And to be honest, reference manager is probably one of the best ways, I think, to stay organized when you have papers that you care about and you've read or plan to read, and then refer back to later on. One of the other things I think Sydney mentioned with the Google Alerts, I also suggest doing that. I think that's awesome. There's also a way to subscribe to specific authors too. I think that's also a part of the way to get alerts on Google. So that's one of the ways that I try to keep on top of different people publishing stuff. But I totally also get Akshay's point about hoarding papers, because that is something I did a lot of. And I just quit. I completely quit it. I closed the tabs and nothing happened. Nothing still happened. So anyways, I'll move on to the next question. All right, we're nearing the hour mark. I think I'll ask this last question for now. I haven't heard anything from the audience. If you guys want to stick around for maybe like 10 more minutes after 5, we can fit in 1 or 2 more questions. For this one, and it's going to vary per person, how did you prepare for your qualifying exam? And if you're on the verge of preparing for your dissertation, how are you doing that? I think I'll let Sydney start again.
So I don't know how it is in engineering. In biology, we have a 3-part qualifier where basically you do an oral defense, or you do a written research proposal, and then you get written questions from your committee member, from each of your committee members, and you basically have to write like a literature review about what they asked you, and then you do an oral qualifier. The oral qualifier was by far the scariest for me, and I'm pretty good at giving oral presentations because it's just about 2 hours where they completely grill you. And if you say, oh, this is my explanation for this, they'll push you on it and be like, tell me more, explain it more, do more, whatever. Number one, I would say you can never bullshit your way through a committee meeting because everyone there usually knows more than you about specific topics, and they're also looking for your mistakes. So if you don't know, the best thing you can do is be like, I don't know, here's my best educated guess. But don't lie about whether you know the answer or not, first of all. Second of all, being really well acquainted with the literature and start reading way in advance. Like, don't wait to catch up on reading until you're right before your qualifier, because you'll absolutely screw yourself. Practice a bunch of times. Find someone who is actually critical of you to practice with. For me, that's my PI. She has made everyone in the lab cry at least once during practices for qualifiers, usually. And it's really beneficial. It sounds kind of crappy, but it's really, really beneficial, because by the time you get to your qualifier, you're like, oh, that was way better than it was when I presented it the first time. So make sure you find someone who can actually be critical enough to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Great. Alex, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I mean, for our lab, what we have to do is like design our own project. You defend the proposal of your project, then you carry out the project and report on your results. So it's pretty involved in that, and they grill you at the end. You can't bullshit your way through it. I mean, what mine was on generative adversarial networks. So it's just neural networks that generate data, and there's a lot of there's a lot of parameters you have to decide on, and what I had to make sure going into it is that I had reasons for every single selection I made. And if I wasn't able to find good reasoning within past research, then I'd have to do some sort of testing on the data itself. And having all that information is critical in defending the actual presentation of your research. Right? So I guess the other thing that I should have probably considered a bit better going into it was just just the computational demands of the research, because I was running a lot on my PC. My PC at home, but that just wasn't going to cut it in time. So eventually I had to learn to use the cluster on campus, or else I just wouldn't be able to get any of my results. So keep that in mind. If it's going to be a lot of computation, consider the cluster, because that really was a lifesaver in mine. Spend a lot of time in literature review. All the selections of parameters was important, but all of it's important. You have to know all the theories. So, spend 1 to 2 months just on literature review before you start. Although if I had started earlier, maybe I wouldn't have run into the problem with time. But still, I think it was really helpful. Man. So.
Great, thank you. Actually, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. This actually, I second what Sydney said about having that one person who can grill you a lot, right? This is very critical, especially in a university. It could be a safe environment. Like your lab mates could, just to make you feel better, they might not really critique you. But I fortunately have one lab member who really questions significantly like what's happening. He will just say that doesn't make sense. Like, he'll just be upfront about it, right? You really need sometimes those comments because if everyone says, that's good. We won't really see what we are missing out on, right? So having that at least one person to really grill you on your approach is very important. Else it's like an echo chamber. Like just keep on hearing, okay, you're doing good, everything is fine. That's not really the case. So having that person is very important. The other thing I really wish to emphasize is, I think for Sydney, I think your department is much better at this. But for electrical engineering department, it's not quite well organized, the qualifier dates and everything. It's really depending on the advisor, when they're doing it and things like that. And there's something I wish I knew when I started, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to be on top of your program. You need to know when you're supposed to do your qualifier, and don't compromise on it, right? Just try to prioritize that I need to finish this by so and so, and work everything around that. So this has to be communicated very frequently. Your advisor might not be available at times. So make sure you bring it up. You have a clear plan on when do you plan to do the qualifier, when do you plan to do the proposal. I think that's very important. Sometimes we procrastinate, or we because the PI doesn't push you, we'll be like, okay, I'll just maybe next semester we'll just keep on doing it, right? So there's something I've learned that we really need to be on top of our plans. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and you're right about engineering being a little bit less organized in general. Actually, I'm in biomedical engineering, and when I did my qualifying exam, Actually, it's really simple. It's just an oral exam, really, but getting dates organized and having things set up for you, everything's last minute. Like I came in at 8 a.m. on the day of my exam, and I was like, can I go into the room? And they're like, oh, we haven't set it up yet. And then my qualifying exam starts in like 15 minutes. But anyways, yeah, I agree with all your sentiments.
I would like to add a
Yeah,
little
go
bit
ahead.
on this. So my experience was, my advisor is like really great about this one. He makes sure that every student is very well prepared for the any kind of presentation. So what she did is that she uh, asked all our lab members to like actually and asked me to present in front of them, and then ask them to ask like at least two critical questions, right? If they don't ask question, that's like, and that's how, Akshay was saying, usually lab mates are very nice. They will say, okay, this is a very good paper you have written, this is a very good presentation you have done. But when your advisor says, okay, you need to ask to a few critical questions, so usually they will actually give you like answer, feedback that are very useful. And I did it, I think, twice, so it was very helpful. So yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's 5 o'clock. I have plenty more questions actually left to add, but I think we'll maybe go for a couple more questions based on some that we've had in the chat right now. I see here there's a couple. So there's a question from Michelle. What tools like Mendeley do you recommend or have served you well? So anyone want to add or suggest
Yeah.
anything? Yeah.
I saw the question and I wrote a list down. So
Okay.
Mendeley for sure. BioArchive. Akshay mentioned BioArchive. It's an open source it's an open source, basically preprint publication service. It's amazing to look at preprints, and you can actually reach out to authors, ask questions, things like that. That it's really super helpful. There's also an app called BioRender. You get it free through the University of Houston. It is amazing for drawing figures and making like biological or, all different kinds of figures and graphs and drawings and things like that. Definitely use BioRender. If you're not already doing it, use Google Calendar for schedule management. And then there's a thing called IDP. They're individual development plans. If you're not doing that just in your life, I feel like a life coach. Definitely start doing IDPs. I love them. It's really good for setting goals for yourself and setting them in a way. Like what I do is, this is going to sound kind of corny, but I make an IDP, I send it to my PI, and I say, I want you to help me stick to this schedule of things that I want to get done this month. And she's usually really supportive about that. And I think most PIs would be, just that you took the initiative. So I type those out and I'll put them in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I could add a few. There is something called connected papers. I would really recommend this. What this does is, if you say, for example, you have one interesting paper that you really liked. Now, if you search a paper in there, it finds papers which are very close to this. And it oftentimes it's very interesting papers which otherwise you wouldn't find. It looks for all the entire database, and it identifies which one is the closest to the paper that you just selected in. It's a very useful tool. As again, Mendeley is great. I would also suggest PubMed or Web of Science. Learn how to do advanced searches there. If you just search for some keywords, you're gonna get like 10,000, 40,000 papers, right? But learn how to optimally use advanced searches. That's very critical. There is something called, I'm trying to remember what would ACR. In US library, if you go to the database, I'll try to get back to it. So there's this tool where you can sort of get some, not ranking, so in some sense some ranking of the journals in your field. So you'll know which are the top journals in there, right? So that really helps you hone down into which papers you need to focus on. I mean, when I started my PhD, I was just doing just Google search on papers, right? I would just do EG, BCI, and whatever comes, I would read. That's not really the ideal thing to do, right? I would say always go for the top journals, papers in that, exhaust the list, go to the next journal, exhaust the list, then go to the next, right? We should really practice looking at very high impact paper. Again, something I learned over the years. So just another suggestion.
Also, to add on to what Akshay just said, the UH library has an amazing seminar / webinar that they teach every year. It's about an hour long. It teaches you how to do really targeted, advanced PubMed, Web of Science searches and things like that. And they also teach you how to calculate approximate impact scores for journals. So I would definitely recommend that. And the tool that they give you even has like previous examples from journals, things like that. And then they also have like what the word limit is, how many figures you can have, things like that for each specific journal. So use the library. They have an amazing set of librarians who are literally just there to help you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I think the only thing I would add, I mean, yeah, because I think everything they said is really great. If you're going to be using a lot of software in general, I would start learning how to use some sort of virtual environment like Anaconda, because you know certain toolboxes might have certain requirements. And well, I've had to reformat my personal Linux computer a couple of times because I just took too many conflicts. So using a virtual environment makes everything a lot cleaner. Yeah, that's
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think Michelle actually had one more question. So she said she joined in fall 2020 and she hasn't set foot on UH campus. Any suggestions for doing productive research when mostly home alone versus interacting with others? I mean, it's been a pretty interesting past year. What do you guys suggest?
Well, you know, I think keeping your office away from your living environment is maybe a good idea. You know, I'm stuck in this little half closet that we have here, which is nice because I can leave this office and kind of separate those two lives. And I think that's good for at least stress reduction. But yeah, I'm excited for Corona to end. So hopefully you step back on the campus, you know, soonish.
Michelle, I don't know which department you're in, but I would highly recommend reaching out to your PI and asking them if they're interested in you writing a literature review. That is the very first thing I did at the beginning of COVID. I was like, hi, what would you like to see me do a literature review on? Because I passed my qualifier 3 days before we went into lockdown. And my boss was like, well, since you just finished this, what about this one topic? And that was really beneficial for me. It kept me busy. It gave me a really good thing that was actually productive to get work toward a publication. And so I would definitely recommend literature review, especially since you're pre-qualifier. This is a great time to start really hammering away at the literature. Thank
you. Actually, Rafael has been helping me a lot. I don't know where he is on the screen compared to me, but I'm in the same lab he is, and he's been really helpful.
Yeah, actually, one other suggestion, because the even the code has been pretty bad, I feel like one big advantage that COVID really brought about is there is huge number of webinars happening right now. Like previously, you had to go to conferences to meet people. Now there is a lot of meet and greets of very famous researchers every week. Even that becomes overwhelmingly high, right? Which is why I really recommend you guys to start academic Twitter. There is so much information being shared about the talks happening. It's a good practice to listen to some talks. You'll get, I mean, always also listen to something that is not in your direct area of research, right? It really is very helpful to do that. So I would say with COVID, try to make use of that change. Maybe listen into a few talks every now and then. Don't make it an addiction still. At the end of the day, you need to do your research. So every now and then try to listen into some talks.
You can also look at international conferences that your lab would normally not be able to afford to send you to. I just went to a conference in the UK. I did have to wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, but I got to watch conferences like TBI conferences in the UK that I normally wouldn't have gotten to go to probably, or would have had to chip in for out of my own pocket. So it was really cool. And when you do go to digital conferences, make a habit of immediately connecting with anyone you meet or watch speak on LinkedIn and on Twitter. I do both. As soon as someone finishes their talk, I make up one really detailed, personalized question about their talk, and then I immediately send them something on LinkedIn and or Twitter. And that I think is the best way to grow your network in a time when you physically can't.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. For my first international virtual conference experience, I think connecting with people at the onset of meeting them will leave a lasting impact and at least help them to remember you whenever you reach out to them for whatever it is. I think we have one more audience question, and that is, what is one thing, this is interesting, what is one thing you would change about the way your graduate program works and why? So any takers?
Can I say money? Can I just say money?
Sure.
Well, money. Akshay and I are actually sitting on a graduate employment committee right now. We're trying to get the university to do things like cost of living assessments or COLAs. I would definitely say that. I would also say that my program does not heavily push things like fellowships. And if you want to be competitive in certain fields, it's really good to have fellowships. However, I never knew this. If you've already done 2 years of graduate study, you are no longer eligible for like NIH fellowships anymore. So if you're in your first year and you're interested in something like an NIH fellowship, now is the time to start cracking on your application. It will make you a more competitive applicant for, postdocs or academic jobs, whatever you want to do. But also remember that there is a time limit on that. And I feel like no one tells you that until after you've already hit it. And then you're like, well, I think I should do this, right? And then people are like, you can't. So think about that.
And it includes masters as the graduate time, which is really disappointing. So.
Yeah, I think that is a bit of a letdown when having to find that out. I can kind of say I do benefit from having a fellowship that I applied to in my first year of PhD. So I will say if you can get a fellowship or apply for one at the beginning, it's probably the best time to start either preparing or start applying. But in terms of the question at hand, I am again, biomedical engineering PhD student, and in my department, the way the grad program works is very secluded. I get the feeling that although, the department is interdisciplinary in and of itself, and the field is interdisciplinary in and of itself, the way that people run the department in terms of the faculty members doing research are very narrow, and they stick to their own kind of cliques and groups, surprisingly. So as for people in the Brain Center, when I think about the faculty that are involved, we actually don't have any biomedical engineering PIs from what I'm aware of, not a single one. And it's surprising because there are people doing neurotechnology research within the biomedical engineering field. And so that kind of startles me a bit. And as someone that is a biomedical engineer, not in a traditional biomedical engineering lab, I can say for a fact that having interdisciplinary work to do really helps you not only gain knowledge in other fields that aren't necessarily your narrow field of expertise, it also increases your network capabilities a lot more. And I think I've benefited from that a lot. And that's one thing I would change about my department, making it more of a collaborative experience as a grad program instead of a more secluded and singular one.
Maybe I should add something.
Sure.
So I kind of have something similar to what Fahim said, like the collaboration. We are doing a lot of collaboration like outside UH, but maybe sometimes I feel that in our department or like even in our college there are a lot of faculties. We can do some interdisciplinary work. I think that is a little bit of missing. For example, sometimes we collaborate within, for example, we have some collaboration with Dr. Contras Vidal's lab, but essentially our groups are not very different. So we sometimes do similar kind of thing. But for example, it is very difficult for me to, maybe it didn't even happen, but we tried to do it. But for doing a collaboration with Fahim's lab, for example, he does like for totally different thing. So, or like, someone from, for example, biophotonics group, if they could build we try to do some collaboration with that. I mean, with one of the group, but we couldn't. I mean, that's something. Maybe I don't know why it didn't happen. Maybe it would have been nice if we could do that, and maybe we could do. Some of the group could make like sensors and things like that, and some of the group can make like analysis tools and things like that. That would have been nice. So yeah, that was my thought.
If I may just add to that, I mean, I think it sort of ties all the points that you all said, right? I think the fundamental one of the fundamental problems for this is still funding thing, in the sense, right now, I mean, living situation is something else, but then typically the NSF grants last for 3 years, right? Or oftentimes we join somewhere in between. So after 2 years, you need to find another funding. So this uncertainty is a big killer in your program. Like, if you don't need to worry about your funding, you could actually really ask a lot of interesting questions. You can actually collaborate a lot. You can really talk to people, figure interesting questions, because we need to work on a grant which dies in 2 years, and then you need to find another thing. You need to restart your entire research. It really is a mental drain, right? So I would assume that, I mean, this is just speculation. I can just say it, right? But if we had a stable financial situation where we don't need to worry about our stipends, I think a lot more collaboration would have happened. A lot more interesting questions would have come up. I feel like that could be something. It's easy to say give us money, but I mean, on a logistical point of view, it's very hard. But this, I feel like if there was a mechanism, it would have really changed a lot of these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just essentially be repeating what everyone else has said, but as an example, I think, and me and Akshay are the lab administrators for the computers. I think half our computers, half the PCs in the lab are from 2008, and it makes it really difficult. And that kind of purchase isn't necessarily going to come from a grant. You can't add on 15 necessary computers, but those computers are necessary for us to do our research. So if there was a bit more funding just for base lab equipment, that'd be pretty nice. So.
Speaking of funding, I'm gonna say one more thing. There are lots of external scholarships that do not specify you have to be an undergraduate to apply for them. I just got one for $1,000 from a dry eye center.
Wow.
You can apply for external scholarships and get money from them that is paid out in cash form or check form, whatever. I apply for probably 3 a month.
Jeez.
I would highly recommend it. I have funded, I've written grants, I've written scholarship applications. If you are not already doing it, apply for external scholarships that don't specify you have to be an undergrad to apply for them. You will write PhD on them and you will almost definitely get them. It is a fantastic way to cushion your stipend.
Where do you get information on these magical awards?
I follow a Reddit page called Our Scholarships.
Oh,
nice.
That's disappointing. I go on Reddit, so I should know this.
You're just not on the right page.
Yeah.
U of H has the scholarships thing too. I found out about a couple of them. I actually just got a $1,500 scholarship from the mothers of twins.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, my favorite one that I've gotten is from the Hot Sauce Depot. I would highly recommend, if you are not already applying for external like the internal U of H scholarships can be really good. Usually I get like 1 or 2 of those a year. I would highly recommend though that you apply for external scholarships as well.
Got it. Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, I wish this talk about 3 years.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to stop getting them because all of you are going to be applying.
Yep, I think we should have done this in the first year.
Actually, we'll be coming to you for advice on how to apply to, you still got the skills.
It's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I would definitely recommend that though.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I think we've had a great productive conversation. I wish we could have more people, but it's great that we've even had some, and getting to share some of our knowledge and pass it down is always fulfilling. Without further ado, let us thank our panelists and each other, I guess, for participating. And we'll have a recording up on YouTube probably, and I'll probably send out an email for the student group as well. Thank you again so much for your time, and take care. Bye now.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.